Ben, you've been an accessible information advisor at the University of Kent for nearly 6 years. What have you done in that time to create a more inclusive and accessible environment?
Thanks, Laura, and hi everyone. Thanks for having me. I think the one of the key things I think is to, and I was really pleased to see that in the survey responses, that it's very much a team game. I think what's happened in the past is we've had a very kind of medical approach to accessibility that has been one department or one person who's responsible. So it's really good to see that it's kind of a shared responsibility, which is I think the only way you can do it. Basically, everybody has to be playing their part in making stuff accessible. It needs to be done at the coalface, and it needs to be done as part of everyone's natural workflow. It's particularly with the onset of these new public sector bodies, websites, and mobile applications accessibility regulations. They require us to kind of front load it. You know, it's no longer good enough to say, oh, let us know if you have a problem and then we'll figure out a solution. We need to figure out the solution at the beginning. So I think one of the key things that we've been trying to do is to change the culture so that people have accessibility at the forefront of their mind in everything they do, whether that's in the university, you know, designing a lecture, designing an assessment, designing a field trip, undertaking some procurement. We've done an awful lot of work with our library around ebooks to try and make that a really important part of the procurement, that, you know, we will score that very heavily, you know, in favor of someone who's able to give us a favorable response in terms of what they're doing for accessibility. Now, we don't expect everything to be absolutely perfect, because a lot of people are kind of, you know, developing their processes around this, as we've seen from the survey results there. But I think what we would want to see is people taking this seriously and being seriously engaged and wanting to make this better, because there's so many reasons for doing it. It's you know, firstly, it's the right thing to do. But I think that there's broader benefits, and I think when we talk about some of the work that Ian's been doing to help us with remediate some of our content, hopefully we can demonstrate how that actually improves the accessibility of the resources. Sorry, that in improving the accessibility, we're improving the sort of broader usability of those resources and making them better and more useful instruments for everyone who comes across them. So I think there's been lots of strategies to make everyone responsible for their little bit of it, in which case that no one has to do the heavy lifting on their own.
I love that idea of thinking of it as, this is the bit that I can do, because no one can do it all. But if everyone does their part, and if as a result of this session, everyone goes away and does their little bit of it, then that cumulative effect is really, really powerful. Ian, so before working at CodeMantra, you worked in-house at CodeMantra, now at John Wiley. Could you please explain what attracted you to working at CodeMantra? Like what drove you to make that shift?
Sure, Laura, and likewise, thank you for having me today. You know, the transition came at a natural time for myself, I believe. I've always been a problem solver. I like puzzles and solving issues. When I made the transition, it was right around the time of the digital era, if you will. So everybody at that time was trying to create their EPUBs or their Moby Pockets, if you remember those. And so getting away from print, not getting away from print, but bringing digital into the mix, right? And so I started that within Wiley, but it seemed like a natural progression that you know, publishers were looking for support and expertise. They had the print industry nailed. They had done it for, you know, decades and decades, right? But this new digital thing, I felt that they were needing support, and there were partners and suppliers like CodeMantra that were specialized in that area. And so it intrigued me. It was another big problem and puzzle to pursue. And so that's what eventually led me to CodeMantra.
Had you worked with CodeMantra when you were in-house, or was it something new to you?
It's a small world, publishing. And so yeah, actually a co-worker, or an ex-colleague had progressed over to CodeMantra prior to myself. An opportunity opened, and therefore allowed me to join up with CodeMantra.
Yeah, sounds great. And did you have something you wanted to show us today, or shall I go to that?
Yep, I will bring up a quick slide. So what I wanted to show, as Ben mentioned, I've been working with him to look at some of the documents. And then what I'm going to speak to is PDFs themselves. So, Ben shared a few different articles and different documents. And what we quickly discovered was that, unfortunately, the PDF files that we found were not compliant. And so what I wanted to do is to just show the impact, right? Everybody hears accessibility. Everybody, maybe believes they understand, but what I really like to try and do is visualize that impact. So what I've done here is, on the left-hand side is just a snapshot of that original article, the first page of it. And I have two different pages within this particular document. And what I usually how I describe this is that, as fortunate and sighted readers, over the many years of reading all kinds of material, we inherently know how to traverse that page. There are various visual cues. We just understand how to read multi-column flow. So all of that is, again, logical and things we have just learned over time. But what about users of assistive technologies, or even other programs for that matter? There are other benefits beyond just solving this particular problem, which is, making the content accessible to those using assistive technologies. But the other benefits are, there are other machines or other software that can make better use of this particular document if it is a compliant document. So the left-hand side, again, is the original page. In a non-compliant state, that same page looks like what you see on the left when accessed by an assistive technology. At best, it's bits and bytes of different paragraphs or even lines. The content's all mixed and jumbled up. You see the third line down is the introduction. Well, that's in the lower portion of the page. There's a lot of content at the top of the original page that should probably be read first and foremost. The abstract is, there, but it wasn't actually accessed by the assistive technology until much later. So this was really a challenging document, and in that non-compliant state. If we take a look then, when it is a compliant document, all of that capability that we have as sighted users is now available to those of assistive technologies, and again, other software programs that may need or benefit from access to this content for other purposes. We navigate through documents visually by looking for different headings and sections, and that's the way we typically consume content today, is these bite-sized pieces. Now that this is a compliant document, they're able to do the same thing. They can search for the section that interests them. How? Because it's been identified with the respective headings and so on and so forth. The links are functional. The next, I wanted to, that's I'll say that's simple text. If you look at a table, right? Imagine, and this is even a relatively simple table. So this same table in a non-compliant state you would not even really know that you've entered into a table, let alone be able to know what the column heads were or the row heads, should they exist. So you're going to know that you encountered a table. You're not going to be able to navigate it like we would. Typically, you don't read a table. You look at the table, assess what information is important to you on your fact-finding mission, and you locate that data cell to get the information that you're wanting, especially in more of a statistical or data-based type of table. But this is an example, again, of that same table after the document has been made compliant. So it presents itself to these assistive technologies or other software, again, as a tabular data, a table, and clearly has the table head, both the column and the row heads identified, and even goes to the extent that there are list items within each of the data cells. So it's not just a paragraph within or a chunk of data, there's actually a list. So the user can expect two things when they encounter each of these data cells, because the assistive technologies can see that. It knows that it encountered a list. It'll tell them that they're on list item 1 of 2. So they don't get lost, right? You could imagine, again, going back to the non-compliant state, you're not even sure if you're reading a table. And if you finally figured it out, you're going to struggle to know where you're at in that particular data set. So I don't know, Ben, if you want to add any other commentary.
Absolutely, yeah, it's brilliant. And I think a key thing is Ian mentioned the broader benefits. I mean, this is an open access. Since a lot of the material I shared was open access content, and of course, that's crucial for academic impact is one of the key measures there. So I think the fact that we're making stuff more accessible by design, that means that we're not leaving anyone behind, and we're future-proofing that content so that when it's published and then it's accessible to everyone, and it's not then gonna, two weeks down the road, you're going to get somebody saying, like, I can't access this content, and it sounds really helpful to me. So I think we feel really strongly that open access should be an absolute beacon of good practice for accessibility, and for those broader benefits of the discoverability, as well as it's the right thing to do. So if you're talking about maximizing your impact, then you need to maximize your audience, and all of the measures that Ian's outlined will benefit everybody. And none of the things that Ian has done to improve the accessibility of some of these documents is going to mess it up for someone who doesn't have a disability. So there's absolutely good reasons to do it. And a crucial thing is to try and build it into the workflow, because ideally, sometimes some of the best placed people to make some of these remediations are the authors themselves, particularly if we were talking about visual images. Maybe we might, let's say this was a paper that had a graph or a chart in it or something that was conveying some visual information. Probably the best placed person to tell you why that image was contextually important in the broader document would be the person who decided to put it in their document. So they would be able to give a very meaningful description of why it's there. So understanding those kind of broader workflows, and that's been a super helpful thing for us in working with Ian, is that we can identify typical issues that we're facing with certain types of content, in order that we can then work out a prioritized list of how we're going to help our authors, our academic staff, to address them at source, rather than kind of any kind of retrospective action, which has got to be the right way to go, because we want this to be a natural part of the workflow. And I always talk about kind of what I would love, and I will then retire and go around the world on my motorbike if ever we can achieve this, is to get people to think of accessibility in the same way that they think of spell check. If most of us wouldn't dream of sending something out to a wide audience without running a spell check. If we did a similar level of accessibility check, I think that would be great, and it should have that similar kind of status in the workflow, because it's super important.
Amazing. I'm so glad you've shown us the visuals here, Ian and Ben, because I think it is like we pay a lot of lip service to accessibility this, but being able to see it and the way it just really hits home, like the difference they can really make by thinking about this, and as Ben said, thinking about it earlier, not retrospectively. Just what you've got plans next at CodeMantra. Obviously, this is really important work that you've been doing that we've seen a snapshot of. Is there anything else that's coming up that would be useful for our audience to know about? And then we'll go to the audience questions.
Sure. Yeah, what's next is so this particular product and service that we've been pursuing and working with Ben on, I've been working on this for the last 4 years, essentially. So what we plan to do is, to broaden our coverage through the use of this product. And, we were predominantly publishing based. Over the last 2 years, we've ventured out into other verticals. But the next big thing, I believe, is going to be, there's a lot of documents that you could classify or categorize. So they're very similar in nature, right? The product that we have built to enable this remediation to be as painless as possible is through a lot of automation, machine learning and whatnot. So our big push right now is to even increase the level of automation through classifying certain document types. I don't know, a particular article may have different content, but the construct of the article is the same. The design of it is the same. Or you can even get into, various contracts. Again, they're very structured in nature, content is different. So looking at more of a highly automated for these high volume or transactional type of documents. But no, our desire and the next big thing is to just continue pushing and doing what's right and helping people achieve that.
Amazing, thank you. And it sounds like everything you're doing is going to speed things up and make accessibility more accessible in a way. So yeah, that's great, thank you. Can you provide us with some good accessibility checker tools? Is there anything you recommend?
It's a really great question. I mean, it kind of depends on what the content is. If we're talking, for example, in the document scenario, there's if somebody's beginning that document in Microsoft Office, for example, there's some brilliant inbuilt tools in the Office workflow, an accessibility checker that will prompt you a bit like it's actually, I think it lives next to the spell check now in certainly in Office 365, and that will take you through some of the accessibility issues that Iron's outlined. So it will help you to look at things in your table. So that would be a really lovely example of just getting that on people's radar as embedding some of this stuff earlier on. If you're talking about web content, there's quite a nice tool called Accessibility Insights, which if you Google that is a similar accessibility checker. I think it's from Microsoft, but that will help you assess the same set of principles for a web page or HTML content. I'd also like to mention that there's an Aspire list, which is a really useful measure for publishers to understand how they're doing, and to get a kind of flavour of kind of how they might benchmark against other publishers across the sector. And I think Hugh's on here now. I've seen him pop up in the list. So any questions, yeah, give Hugh a shout. But that would be a good way to check in and get an overall kind of feel of how you're doing, because we're all on a journey. None of us have cracked this yet.
If the author's tool is Microsoft Word or InDesign, how can we make that check more usable for an author? Is that what Ian's tool does? So for the things that require a human check, like reading order, is that what you were just saying about the function that's next to the, yeah? Yeah,
sorry, Ian, you go ahead.
Yeah, no, so right, in Microsoft Word, Ben's right, that inbuilt ability for the author, most of them are working in Word. And the earlier you can start doing things, obviously the better. It can be an additive process then as the content proceeds through the life cycle to final publication. But if you start somewhere, then it only gets better and easier along the journey instead of trying to fix everything at the end. So absolutely the inbuilt in Word helps. And then with regards to InDesign, there are similar best practices there as well, so that you don't lose any of that particular work that the author happened to do. So there are best practices to carry that through the process. And then, I would not say that there's necessarily an accessibility checker for InDesign, but whatever you create from InDesign, be it your PDF or an EPUB or some other digital export, there are a variety of tools that could assist there. Acrobat does have its own, just like Word has its own inbuilt. Selfishly, I'll mention our product as well. We are able to validate 5 different formats. And the reason we build our own validation is because there was a problem doing it at scale. One of the very first projects that we received at CodeMantra was, I have 1,000 PDF files. Can you tell me if they're compliant or not? At that time, we did not have our product. And what did we do? What everybody else in the industry at that time had to do, which was download a standalone app, deploy a handful of people to run these 1,000 files. And a week later, we finally had the results. That was when a light bulb went off in my head that there's a fundamental problem. You should not have to work for a week to figure out. So our product can do that at scale, along with the Office formats, Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. And, full disclosure, we have integrated Daisy. Daisy has an awesome checker for EPUB. So we have incorporated Daisy's ACE checker for EPUB. And that's a wonderful tool for the EPUB format itself.
I'd like to know more about the software, particularly the machine learning part. Also things like EPUB conversion. I can imagine this would be very good for libraries to make up for the deficiencies of publishers. So anything else about the software that you could share with us, please?
Yeah, so we take great pride in the software. CodeMantra's been around for nearly 2 decades, and how that benefited us to solve this particular problem is we had processed such a large corpus of documents and different types of documents. That ends up being a tremendous data lake for us to use for training our machine learning models. As a result, then we get good accuracy in those classifications of the content, the headings, the lists, the tables, and so on and so forth. It's not perfect. And so that's where, we added on a UI to allow people to review the results and make adjustments to those. So if it made a mistake and said everything was in heading 2 and it should have been in heading 3, it's easy enough to change that. But the big advantage is that no one had to go through manually and identify each and every one of those things across a 100-page document or something. So couple the machine learning and the ability to predict those content types and build that structure, along with the reading order. That's the other component that's equally important to the structure. And then to finish it off is the ability to, again, check the compliance of the results. All of it in a very scalable solution. So please reach out. I can get into more geek speak.
I hope you can't tell from my face. I'm not. But yeah, thank you so much. Brilliant answers to all of the questions. Ben and Ian, thank you for giving up your time this lunchtime. It's just been really interesting, and I'm sure everyone's going to take something away that they can do, that they can implement and make a difference here. So thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.